we've had an opportunity, I think it's fair to say, during the whole day for a lot of people to get to have their say. Not only people who want to ask questions, make comments from the floor, but also the speakers themselves. I hope we'll all feel that they've been given enough room to speak in sub-clauses, as it were, and we've had some quite interesting and complex discussions, complete opposite of what we specialise in on the Today programme, where we specialise or tend to specialise in getting people to say things very quickly, and the great lesson on sound bites is taught to us all by John Major, who this is a true story, but it kind of hurts, particularly those of us in broadcasting, still grievously whenever he tells it. And it's the story of him going to see, some of you might have heard it, he goes to see Boris Yeltsin when Yeltsin's at the in charge in Russia, but Russia's absolutely going down the tube. So I suppose it's the early 1990s. Major's just become prime minister. A lot of question marks about him as well and his ability to do the job. And he's with Yeltsin, and they have this ornate corridor in the center of the Kremlin where the two leaders walk to go from their meeting in the morning to lunch. And Major thinks he ought to make a bit of conversation with Yeltsin. So he says to Yeltsin, Boris, in a word, what is the state of your country? To which Yeltsin replies, in a word, good. And Major, as he tells it, thinks, oh my God, I've been made to look like a complete idiot in front of my civil servants, because obviously Russia isn't in a good state at all, and I'm going to look like a moron unless I find some way of coming back to it. So he turns back to Yeltsin just as they're going into lunch, and he says, tell me, Boris, what is the longer version of that? And Yeltsin says, not good. It's always struck me as the kind of absolutely model kind of. It's right. You don't only just get less of a discussion, less of a set of answers from employing only sound bites. You actually often quite obfuscate the subject you're trying to discuss. So anyway, I hope we've managed to stay off that today, and we have allowed people to talk in more than sound bites, and we've had the good and the not good. Talking of which. We have here three panelists, lots of you will know them, who are going to talk now. Well, actually, they can go in pretty much any direction they care to go in for a few minutes each, and then we'll sort of draw it back via you to the direction that you'd like to go in. So let me introduce Chaz Hallett, Editor-in-Chief What Car, Steve Cropley, Editor-in-Chief of Autocar, and Keg Gibson, who's Editor Motors at The Sun. And I'm going to ask Chaz to kick us off.
Okay, thank you, Justin. I suppose when my thinking of perceptions of the UK automotive industry, I think you have to distinguish between what the global motor industry thinks of the UK industry and what UK consumers' perception of the UK industry. We've heard lots today about what a good place the UK is to do business and invest, and all the new jobs that are going to come this year, which is a great thing. And I know Ken's going to talk a lot more about that in a second. But I suppose I'd like to just ramble on for 30 seconds about what I think consumers' point of view about British car industry and British cars particularly. And I suppose the short answer is I don't think most consumers care less whether it's a British car or not. I think that's the harsh reality. I think we've long gone past, apart from a very small section of consumers, we've long gone past people caring where a car is made. As long as it's a good car and right for them, I think that's more paramount in most consumers' mind. Having said that, I think you have to distinguish at the very top end. I think cars like Aston Martins, Rolls-Royce, even Range Rovers, there is no lure to a car that's made and designed and created in Britain. But for most people, it doesn't matter. And I suppose a good case study to back that up is the situation of Jaguar. Jaguar last year sold less than 60,000 cars globally a year in last year, which is not very many when you consider that Audi, BMW, and Mercedes all sold as near as, damn it, 100,000 cars each in the UK alone, which tells you all you need to know about perhaps what even the British consumer thinks about British cars. Largely because Audi, BMW, and Mercedes made a wide range of cars and got an offering that Jaguar just can't currently compete with. And we all know that Jaguar are going to get there in the end, and they're expanding and they've got lots of investment. But the simple fact of the matter is, and Jaguar is probably proof of this, but just being British is not good enough. And we've also got lots of historical proof about that. If you think about what's happened to the British motor industry and all the indigenous brands that we've lost along the way, I don't think consumers really care about British cars enough to buy them just because they're British alone. And I think that's something that is very key. And I think people do respect, I think British consumers do respect the abilities we have in this country to create very high-end luxury products. And of course we all know that British cars have a certain design, a certain look all of their own. But I don't think it's enough really. And that's the feedback we get from our readers all the time. They just want a good car. They don't really care where it's made. Having said that, one question I also have is why some manufacturers perhaps should maybe even trade a little bit more on the fact they're British. And I suppose one thing that springs to mind is, say, Mini. And I've long never really quite understood why Minis need to be designed and engineered in Munich. And every time I see a picture of a Mini that comes from BMW's press office, for instance, it's left-hand drive and wearing Munich number plates, which I think is slightly disgraceful, really, for what is ostensibly a British brand. But, I mean, that's just a small side point, but the headlines, I think there is an allure for British cars, there is an allure for British cars globally, but just being British is not good enough to appeal to consumers. It has to be a great car as well.
Steve Cropley.
I approach this with a certain amount of humility, ladies and gentlemen, because I've spent my life saying that the only thing about hacks, the only thing they know is what they get told. So it seems a bit odd for you to want to know what I think. However, I just jotted down a bunch of random thoughts really here. I came here when labour relations were on the floor, when management was in the sort of shout down the corridor school. The first trip I ever made was to Cowley, the car factory. I drove there in a Citroën, left it in the courtyard at the front, and when I came back somebody had put a forklift blade through the driver's door. So things have changed a bit since then. And the thing that I would like to, I suppose, note is the extreme improvement in management. I think the people are substantially still the same people, but there's just been a wholesale improvement in the way these firms are managed. One observation. The other one is that I am mesmerised really by the amazing achievements of the German motor industry in this country. I was one of the people who thought the Mini wouldn't work. I don't admit it to everybody, but I'll tell you that. I was obsessed with size. They were obsessed with character and brand values and all the rest of it, and they were right. Bentley has been taken to extraordinary volume. Rolls-Royce has produced a car we were astonished by, but it works. Aston Martin, owned by Ford and then Middle Eastern owners, but it has the values of Ulrich Betz driving it on, and consequently the cars are beautifully made and they work well and so on. So I suppose I'm always rather taken with the need to sort of celebrate the achievements of the German management who've shown us how to do it. One thing that's on my mind particularly, though, is a while ago one of our contributors did a bit of a fag packet survey, and he discovered that since 1990 there are something like 3 times more models offered these days in Britain than there were, which means that in 365 days a person with a new car or a new model to publicise has a third of the time that they did have to get any attention to it. Advertising fragments, as you know, not many people watch TV. It's hard to get to the, in the olden days when Morecambe and Wise were on, you could advertise next to them and 17 million people would see your advertisements. Not like that anymore. So I would like to record a sturdy commercial for people like us who not only report things but also influence other journalists. And I think communications has never been more important than it is now. And I'm not knocking the people who in this audience who are involved in communications, but I do think that managements should consider moving it a long, long way up the pole, because we are actually, people like us in particular, we are a soft touch. We're there. We're ready to be utilised if treated in the correct way. Ken is one of the Britain's most positive motoring writers. Chaz has the biggest magazine going. My own magazine has 16 foreign editions, including India, China, Japan. We can get your message across, and yet I don't think we're utilised as well as we might be. But the last thing I would like to say is just it's just a kind of something that strikes me. I was talking to a friend of mine who has a Mini, and he loves it, or he loved it, and he fell out of his, he sort of fell, had a bit of a spat with his dealer for over a very small thing, and he said to me over a coffee one morning, if these people don't want to be my friends, I'll find someone who does. And he's going to sell his car, and it seems a terrible waste of business. And I think that I cannot understand for the life of me why all service receptionists are not on 120 grand, and why they haven't had 6 weeks of intensive training. Because they are the one person that you deal with once you've made your car choice. They're your only contact with the company, and yet these people are often, let us say, people of low degree. I cannot understand how the industry allows that to happen. I could go on, but what do we do about it? How do we make the British industry go forward? We stress the advantages. We make more noise, as I'm saying. We stress the design and engineering things that we're so good at, especially in schools, which I feel could be done better. We fight to keep the racing industry here. The Eccleston era is ending. It's going to be really interesting to see whether the industry does any migration when he's gone. Perhaps more will come here, who knows. But I think that there's and maybe build links with the German industry that I admire so much.
Steve, thanks. Ken?
I think I'd make Steve the head of promotions for the British car industry. He's a positive lad. This summit couldn't have been better timed, really. I mean, I'm quite impressed by all of you still sitting here to listen to three journalists at this time of night. So that shows how positive a mood we're all in. It has to be said,
there is another attraction later on, but I won't draw attention to it. I'm sure it's the journalists as well.
I can't believe that.
Ken.
As I say, the summit does seem to be perfect timing, almost to the stage of being stage managed by Paul. We have sales up 7.9% in May. They're up 2.6% for the first 5 months. And there's predictions this week that we will be producing over 2 million cars at our car plants by 2015. Staggering figures when you consider that that would be 50% more than in 2011. Sometimes I think we need to shout a hell of a lot more about the good news. We are also sitting here guilty, particularly on the national media, TV particularly again, and newspapers. We love a bad story. We love depression, something serious. I think there should be certain sections of papers that have to be positive news, and on the TV they should get back to the good days of where you at least had one amusing story at the end of the bulletin to save you from committing suicide. In the last 12 months, it's been major significant happenings in the UK. We have had big investment from a host of overseas companies. And I can assure you it cannot be for the British weather that they're coming here to do the new stuff. You know, the Japanese, Americans, Germans, Indians, you know, there's a whole cross-section, and they've invested here for one reason and one reason only, on pure business sense. And that's because we now have a double combination. The management, Steve says, that's true, that's working well, but that management is now working with a real belief with the workforce. This is the huge difference now that's happening. We have got the most flexible motoring workforce in the world. They can compete with anyone. That's why they're winning factories. When they get a new car at Ellesmere Port, you know, it's simply because they've not just beaten themselves, they've beaten other European car plants, they've beaten American car plants. So we've got this workers now that is, they're incredibly flexible. The Ellesmere Port deal, 51 weeks a year that plant will now be capable of working. You just imagine it, 51 weeks a year. And I remember as a business journalist on the Birmingham Post covering the Red Robbo days at British Leyland, so I've seen the other side. I slept on a production line one evening with the night shift at British Leyland. And the change is incredible. I thought there was a slight delay on that one there.
You slept with the entire night shift at British Leyland.
He's a very hard-working reporter.
The efforts I've gone into in my career, Justin, you have no idea, to try and get on there. One of the things that I like as well is that, you know, we've now got some great individuals as well. The British car industry, I did a thing with a magazine recently where we named the top 50 Brits working around the world, and that really is the story. We have got some of the greatest car designers in the world, some of the greatest engineers in the world. We've got a fantastic backcloth of people that any other country would be proud of, any other country. And at the moment, when you look at those positive stories I've given you, the rest of Europe is facing serious problems. They're talking about closing plants in France, closing plants in Germany, closing plants in Italy, and with predictions that sales will continue to drop in general in Europe for the rest of the year. This is a really tough time for the industry. Now, obviously, in the UK, we're not immune from this. And if, you know, productions of sales falling across Europe happens, then we could be facing a much tougher second half of the year. But what I would say is, let's enjoy the good times in the British car industry. Let's actually be really proud of what we're doing at the moment, what's being delivered, and actually give the industry a pat on the back, because it really deserves it.
Right, thank you all three. We've got a few minutes to throw it open to anyone who wants to say anything, ask anything, otherwise take part. And we've got the microphones, as usual, ready to come down. And one of a possible place to start, I guess, is the whole business of the buying experience and dealerships, and how your readers tell you they want to buy cars in the future, or indeed now, because it's something that we discussed both in the plenary session this morning, but also in breakout sessions, the kind of huge changes that there are potentially, the involvement of social media, the fact that people are going to dealers really just to make the very final decision rather than visiting again and again and again. What's the future there? Anyone who wants to kick off on that?
Well, I mean, my experience is borne out by lots being said today. People, obviously, you know, the access to information via the internet and social media allows people to narrow down the number of visits they make to dealerships. But I think people still want to kick tyres, in my experience. They still want to go to the dealer to make the final transaction. And of course, the car industry is rather unique, because inevitably there's a trade-in to be done as well. When you buy a washing machine or a television, you don't generally cart the old one back to John Lewis to get it valued. But the car industry is so unique. So, I mean, every used car is unique. So you still need to go to the dealership to make that transaction as well. I think people want to sit in, smell the car, touch the car, and do the final deal face to face.
Is that what they're telling you as well? In your
Well, I think that there's another issue, which is that buying a car, the specification of cars is so complicated these days that you really need an opportunity to go and look at these things. You might have, you know, a car might be offered with 5 or 8 different wheel styles. BMW have 2 different steering systems.
Yeah, but you can see it all on the internet. You don't need to go.
But you can't feel it. You need to go and drive the car. You absolutely must drive the car.
Must you, though? I
You
look at the
must,
three of you and I just wonder whether...
Well,
I mean,
if
you
you're
obviously care about
No,
cars,
but the point is...
he's you know, done whatever
No,
he's
the-
done at Longbridge in
all
years
cars
gone
work
by.
well.
Not
All
everyone wants to do that. That's my point.
all
And
cars
that's
will
what we were
work
hearing
well,
this morning.
but the thing that delivers the difference is how they are to be in now. It's the ownership experience. You can buy with your eyes closed for sure, but if you want to enjoy it, you really need to be informed about it.
If you're paying from between 2,000-3,000, which means a lot to a certain customer, up to 30,000, 40,000, and you don't test drive a car and seriously test drive it, then you want seriously certifying, because, you know, that's big money. You know, who is going to spend that amount of money by sort of saying, oh, I read a really nice thing on the internet and it was glowing and it was wonderful, and the dealer and the salesman rather surprisingly tells me this car is absolutely fantastic, and that without getting into it, it'll fit me like a glove and it'll be just what I wanted.
Does anyone
That's
think
why they need to get
I
in.
mean, does anyone think we can get to it, or we would one day get to a stage where at least some sort of maybe lower end cars would just people would buy them pretty much off the internet without? Yes, there's one person right there in the middle. Tell us why. Yes, someone else there. Microphone coming across.
Thank you, Kieran Fennelly.
Hold on a second. Can we have some sound on that microphone? Bang it on the top. That usually gets them going. Okay.
Hello again, Kieran Fennelly. Wasn't Tesco's experience exactly that people wanted more than just an anodyne exchange of goods experience? And they and others have pulled out of retail car selling and left it to the traditional outlets.
Yeah, that's a good point. There have been some experiments already, and they haven't worked.
Gentleman here also had a view on this. Yep, down at the bottom.
Yeah, Paul Marquick, Vehicle Certification Agency. I think it depends on the price point. I mean, you've seen motorcycles coming from the Far East and just sold on the internet, and they're not very good and they don't last very long. But there is I think a section of public who will just buy on price, in my experience.
You think it could have? It will
buy
have
on
in the future.
price. Yeah.
What about ownership model? Because the other thing that we touched on this morning, in fact, we more than touched on, we discussed at some length, is ownership models. And indeed whether people actually don't own cars to the extent, particularly young people, have got into a way of thinking about cars where it's a mode of transport. You pick it up somewhere, you leave it somewhere. You don't physically own it yourself, or you don't own it for as long. And in those scenarios, then the way we think about cars and choose them as brands, one brand over another, is different.
I think that people now are, when it comes to ownership, you get a split thing. You can't generalize on it, but I think that I talk to youngsters now because I'm always interested in getting a cross-section of views, and they still have a desire to own cars. The youngsters I talk to, they still aspire to a car, and it goes all the way through. The different cars I have outside my house, I still get knocks on the door from people saying, is that car really good? Can I go and test that? So I think that, yeah, there will be people who will say, no, it's just an object, that's fine, that's really good. I can pick it up at the station, I can drive it into town, that suits me perfectly. I've never been interested in cars. And I think that works, and the systems are there. But hopefully for our jobs at least as well, because we're writing about them, there are still lots of people that have got, as we have, a passion about cars, and that, they enjoy the driving experience. And it's something that shows you what you've achieved in your job. It's still a way of sort of saying, must be doing well. Look at the car and the driver.
I think that's a very old-fashioned view, if I may say so. I put it to you. I suppose I'm not meant to have an opinion, am I? I put it to you. That's actually... It's not the Today programme now, is it?
Well, I think...
And I'm not John.
I am a very old-fashioned person.
Yeah, I mean, I'd throw it out again. Does anyone think that he's wrong in that, or is there? Because we had this discussion this morning with a kind of sense of actually younger people, and the guy from BMW was suggesting that his own experience, his son, had a kind of, was able to use the German system whereby you can go on the metro and then pick up a car and take it somewhere and then leave it where you want to leave it, actually, and it's then picked up. And whether that becomes the model of the way people use cars.
I think the compelling model is to pay something to a manufacturer for a car, and if you fancy a sports car for the weekend, you can have one, and if you are moving house, you can get a van, and so on. I've always most households contain more than one car, and I think that this extreme practicality at one end of it allows you to own something silly. A lot of us, people like us, have something balmy in the garage, but we'd be quite happy to, or I would be quite happy to just be able to drive whatever was appropriate. I think that's coming.
Yeah. Again, I throw it out to anyone who wants to bring anything up. But the other thing that we discussed a lot during the course of the day is carbon emissions and efforts to reduce them, and electric cars and whether they're going to catch on and when. And there was a sort of general view that actually by 2020 you're still talking about roughly nothing more than 10% penetration. Does that accord with your view, and is there significant consumer resistance to totally electric vehicles, and if so, what is that range, or what?
Government ministers like to talk about EVs quite a lot, but the simple fact is they're for the majority of people, they're a side issue. At best, they're the world's best second car, an electric car, but the fact is at the moment they're too expensive and they're too compromised. And I don't think that's going to change for years and years and years. I think even in 30, 40 years' time, the principal method of propulsion would be internal combustion engine. And it's as simple as that. And I can't see that changing. We've all heard this morning about how technology is going to improve a lot with the internal combustion engine. It's going to carry on going. And I think the bulk of people will still buy a conventionally powered car because an EV is very compromised at the moment and very expensive and doesn't fit most lifestyles. It's as simple as that.
And the central compromise is range, is that what people tell you?
Well, and charging, you know, it's pretty hard if you live in Battersea to run a cable across a footpath into your car.
Or
You know,
a tower block.
if you don't have, or a tower block, absolutely.
I'm a big fan of actually driving electric cars. We were lucky enough at work to have a Nissan Leaf in the car park, and I use it to come into town. I can get free parking in Westminster, but I'm using it like a second car. I'd never ever have one as a principal form of transport.
The thing that's interesting is that in some circumstances they can be, I believe they could actually do the major amount of the mileage in a household. I live in a village in the Cotswolds, 4 miles from a market town. We would do probably 70% of our motoring in a Leaf, but we would always need something to go to Edinburgh if we needed to.
For the majority of certainly Sun readers and the people I talk to, affordability is the key issue. And in the current economic situation with jobs and everything else, that will remain the key thing. It's about, well, you know, you may think, I'd love to drive that clean and green, but if it's 25,000 plus, you're taking a huge amount of people out. And until they get battery technology down and the prices down, we will talk about it, and governments will give whatever incentives they can do. But if you look at the figures that have been taken up on the £5,000 incentive, you know, 1,000 last year or round about that. Funny enough, I've just suddenly seen Jeremy there, and that reminds me of Renault. The Twizy is an interesting prospect because it gets to 6,690. If I've got it wrong, it's near enough there, isn't it, Jeremy? And that is quite an interesting little machine. I had that in Ross, near where I live, a country area, and it fascinated the people there. But the two key questions were how much, how far. Whenever you talk electric, that's the thing. And that may start to make a breakthrough, but again, it's compromised because it doesn't have a full body covering, and in the recent British weather, you would need to have the full kit to go with it.
What we had heard earlier from Renault was another interesting idea, which they're pioneering in Israel, where you just take out the battery and swap it at a petrol station, what used to be a petrol station, and that works potentially.
The country needs to have a very specific sort of architecture. You know, if you try it in Australia, it won't work.
Yeah, but I'm thinking of Britain, actually. I mean, Israel is tiny.
Britain
but
is difficult as well, I think, because you know, you would arrive at your service area and find that there were 15 people that wanted the same battery. I think that's a tough one. I think the fast charging is a much better idea, where you pull up in your Leaf, you know that you have to half an hour or 40 minutes to kill, so you go and have a coffee and you come back and it's 80 or 90% charged and you drive on.
Yeah. Gentleman right in the middle there.
Hi. I'm probably the person you're all talking about. I drive a Nissan Leaf during the week. I only travel 18 miles to work and 18 miles back. I drive a Jaguar at the weekends. It saved me a fortune in petrol. It saved me £300 to £400 a month. I pay £400 lease for the vehicle. I didn't buy it because of the issue with the batteries and the cost of the batteries later. But at £400, that's very affordable. And it's a lovely car to drive.
Well, your experience is exactly why I always refer to it as the world's best second car. I think you'll exactly typify what I'm talking about.
Also, I think your experience is interesting because I always wish more people had an opportunity to drive a Leaf, because it is genuinely a special experience, isn't it? It's it's a sort of new way of driving, very quiet, serene, smooth. It's when you get into something with an engine chuntering away, it's a bit of a shock to the system, isn't it?
It is with the two extremes I've got.
Well, that was another thing we heard from Renault, actually, on the leasing idea. Is not you didn't lease the car, but you leased the battery. Does that make need?
Well, you still have to buy the car and then lease the battery.
Yeah.
So
The good thing about it is that if some batteries are, we're told, on the advance, so presumably what happens is that when there's a better battery, they give you one because you've paid for it.
Yes.
So, but you're insuring yourself so that you'll get the benefit of improving battery technology.
Yeah. Again, if anyone's got anything to say, last couple of seconds, I just want to turn the sort of broader picture with regard to the industry. Plainly it's we're in troubled times. The car industry, to an extent, has managed to buck the trend. Can it continue? What are the bumps along the road in the way, and what are the things that government should be thinking about and the industry should be thinking about?
Well, the Eurozone is the big bump in the way, and if you can predict what's happening with that, that would help, because that's the thing they don't know about. They all have contingency plans, and as I say, I think that you will see some car factories closing. But the problem is it should be coordinated across Europe, and you can't get governments to do that coordination, and you can't get the manufacturers. They have a body where they all get together and they discuss the need to reduce overcapacity, and then they look at each other and then say, are you going first? Because closing a car plant is not popular, whether it's in Germany, Spain, Italy, France, or the UK. And then it hits the wall, and everyone says, well, I'm not going there. And that's half of the problem. It needs to be coordinated, but who's going to coordinate it? Who's going to take the first step? In the end, probably profit and loss will make the decisions, because the companies that are not strong enough to survive, they will be the companies that will have to make those hard decisions.
I have a bit of a concern in the medium term, because I am optimistic enough to think that the concerns over the euro will iron themselves out. And I guess to do that, the way we hear it, the countries involved are going to have to tie themselves together very, very securely. And they're going to form a unit that we won't be part of. And I think that if there's any, it's conceivable that we may suffer by not being in the club.
That was the very strong message from Ian Robertson at BMW, wasn't it, this morning? Well, I mean, albeit from obviously his perspective. But I wonder if that is going to be a kind of broader, should it be a broader perspective from the industry at this early stage of the debate? And we're probably, I don't want to get into too much politics, we are probably or possibly going to face a referendum on our own relationship with Europe, whatever happens with the euro. What stance does the industry need to take?
Well, from a British perspective, I think the British government needs to carry on doing all it can to make the UK a good place to do business in, to get inward investment, so that we carry on encouraging foreign car companies, to help our indigenous car companies such as Jaguar Land Rover make investments overseas so they can succeed in growing markets like Asia, and lastly, to do what it can to carry on enabling consumers to buy cars cheaply.
Also stress the skills we have. We produce a greater proportion than we punch above our weight producing engineers and designers, and we must spare no effort to keep doing that.
Yeah. That's the other thing. We've had recent cases which is encouraging of the car manufacturers starting to take on apprentices. Again, that needs to be, there could be maybe a better structure to that, formulated, and the government can play, and is playing a role in that, but can play a bigger role. And I think that Steve's right, you cannot overemphasize that. We need to make engineering in the motor manufacturing industry seen as a really desirable job, as a job that people want to get into. It's a dynamic industry. It's an exciting industry. We need to be selling that harder. That's why the Germans are successful on the manufacturing front. They push the manufacturing, the motor industry as a prime industry. That's something that people should want to be in.
Ken, Steve, Chaz, thank you all three very much.